Okay, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to episode 8 of Fitness Decoded. Today we've got an interesting topic. It's going to be another kind of in depth research episode. We're going to be talking about what's called fad diets. And also going along with that is like weight loss products, like any of those supplements that any kind of like influencer or MLM will try and sell you. So we're going to be talking about those as well. Um, Obviously, here today with me is my co-host David. How are you?
I'm pretty good, man. How are you?
I am doing excellent. So I guess we can just
Yes.
hop right into it because we got quite a lot of interesting things today. So David, take us in. What exactly are we going to be talking about today?
All right. So today we're gonna go over a variety of different fad diets. In regards to what we can call a fad diet, there's no specific definition. If anything, we can simply label it as. What would you label a fad diet as? That's a good question.
I
I
well,
would say.
I label a fad diet as anything that's not it's just, like fad diet is not necessarily in this term a negative term, but usually what a fad diet refers to is something that's well, I mean, a fad is something that's big and then it's not. So, uh, much like a lot of these diets where it's a craze, everyone's into doing this specific diet and then it dies out, or it's found that it's not as effective as it was said it was to be, or just better things come along. But when we talk about fad diets specifically, they're basically just a bunch of like there when we talk about diets, I guess there is no specific one diet that you should do. There's going to be a whole bunch of different diets that I'm sure you've heard of, like things we're going to talk about today. We got like paleo, keto. We're not going to be talking about vegetarian or like veganism because I think everybody knows what those are. Those are like, if you don't, then a vegan will go out of their way and try and tell you
You
exactly
will
what
know.
veganism is. So
you,
yeah, just
somebody will inform you whether you like it or not.
yeah, just talk to a vegan or vegetarian. They will let you know. So we're not going to go over those, but I would even say those would be considered a fad diet in my opinion.
To a certain extent, I guess anything it doesn't necessarily have to have like a substantial amount of research. It's simply something that comes and goes, and doesn't necessarily have to go either. You know.
Yeah, like
All
there
right.
are
So,
fad diets that have been around since like the 70s.
and for a longer period. In fact, we're gonna cover a couple that have been for around for a while and have taken up different names and different iterations of like exactly what they are. So today that's gonna be pretty much our topic. We're gonna go over various fad diets, give our impression, a little bit of history, and not so much a verdict of good or bad, but simply our recommendations and who probably should be trying them and who shouldn't. So yeah, I guess as a preface or intro to this episode today, we're gonna go over just a couple of concepts that we covered in our previous two episodes about nutrition, specifically surrounding weight loss and weight gain. Of course, overall health and quality of your diet is very important for various reasons, but the majority of these diets are primarily centered around weight goal or weight gain, as they are usually general population diets, which that is the main goal behind them. So, when we look at weight loss and weight gain, when we look at our priorities, the most important aspect of weight loss or weight gain is simply just going to be calorie balance. Quickly to go over, calories, the unit of energy, it's the amount of energy required to raise the temperature of water by 1 degree, and we consume calories from the foods and liquids that we consume. In regards to where we obtain calories, like I said, the foods and liquids we consume, but also in extreme circumstances, our body can break down its own tissues in order to create energy for our daily life. Um, this tissue is usually going to be body fat or adipose tissue, but in some extreme instances, primarily simply like extreme starvation, the body will turn to other tissues such as like skeletal muscle. But in the Western world, that's not really a concern that your typical person is going to have unless you live in extreme poverty or something like that. Um, in regards to calories in relation to weight gain or weight loss, now that we've established that calories are the most important determinant of tissue gained or loss, we can outline the two relevant states of I guess, energy balance someone has to be in to achieve this. A, you can be in a calorie deficit for weight loss, or B, you can be in a calorie surplus for weight gain. You can also just be at caloric maintenance, but for the most part, most of these diets aren't really focused on remaining at maintenance unless it's something health related. When it comes to a calorie deficit, essentially the body is in a state where it's not getting enough calories to meet energy demands and must break down its own tissues to do so. This results in weight loss over an extended period of time. Hopefully that you're in a deficit for a period of time where it's primarily body fat. Ideally, you don't want it to be skeletal muscle unless you're not too concerned with, your only concern is just general weight loss and not like exactly where the tissue comes from. Power to you, whatever you decide to do. When it comes to weight gain, the body is in a state where it's getting more than enough calories to meet energy demands. To meet energy needs, and has to store this excess energy, typically as body fat. And this is going to result in weight gain over an extended period of time. For the majority of the diets we're going to talk about, it's primarily has to do with weight loss, or more specifically, body fat loss. Which is an important principle to remember throughout all the diets that we talk about, especially when it comes to either weight gain or weight loss, aside from health priorities. All effective diets focused on weight gain or weight loss depend on the principle of calorie balance. And what I mean by that, simply calories consumed versus energy expended. That's going to be the underlying principle that makes any of these diets successful, again, in relation to weight gain or weight loss. If you want to learn more about how to go about calculating your calories or for specific goals, check out episode 2, General Nutrition Guidelines, on our Twitch or YouTube channel. Shameless plug. Or check out the Renaissance Diet 2.0 book, which is what I base a lot of the stuff I talk about. You know, a lot of good stuff in that book if you want to learn some more specifics about how to go about planning your own diet. But that's pretty much the preface for this podcast episode today.
Right. So yeah, basically any of these diets, whether they're established diets or fad diets, for the most part, there are some exceptions, are going to focus on making sure you're losing more calories than you're gaining, because that's the main method of fat loss. That's how we lose weight. So kind of getting into that, there's a few different things, like going back to fad diets, that are going to kind of tip you off and cue you when you look at them and go, hey, maybe that's not going to work for me, or maybe I should just stay away from that completely. Clues that a weight loss program are not going to be taking a healthy approach, because a lot of these are, not a lot, but some of these are going to be unhealthy weight loss programs. They're not going to be good for your general health, because there is a healthy way to lose weight and there's an unhealthy way to lose weight. Some of them promote that, some of them do not. But things you want to look for or and try and avoid is anything that's going to promise a rapid weight loss. So that's going to be more than 2 pounds a week, because like the healthy weight loss rate is going to be that 1 to 2 pounds a week. If you're losing any more than that, unless you are doing something like specific, there are specific things that will let you lose more weight than that. But if a program is advertising, hey, you can lose even more than 2 pounds a week, then probably you want to stay away from that, because that is an unhealthy.
The only caveat with that is people who are very obese.
Yeah.
Simply because they will lose. And I guess when we say 1 to 2 pounds of a week, we also have to consider that's not just simply body fat or tissue. That's also water, and other waste products in the body. So for individuals who are very obese, it's not uncommon for them to lose initially maybe like 4 or 5 pounds a week, and then it kind of stabilizes off. Yeah. If you're doing a 12-week diet and you're losing 3 pounds a week, you were probably way too aggressive in your methods, and you were definitely running the risk of losing like skeletal muscle tissue or just other general negative health effects.
Right. Anything that's going to promote a diet that's going to be extremely low in calories. So when we talk about extremely low, I would say that's anything less than 1,200 calories a day. Obviously, it's going to vary because everyone has their own caloric needs, but typically anything under 1,200 calories a day is going to be in that iffy area, especially if you are continuously doing that. Like if that's just something to kickstart the process, fine, but if that's the program is under 1,200, even under 1,000 calories a day, then there's probably going to be an issue there. Certainly anything that's going to make you dependent on their products, because there are a lot of weight loss programs and a lot of fad diets out there that are going to try and sell you on this product and this product, and oh, this is our own pill that we've come up with that's going to help increase your rate of fat loss. Stay away from anything that tries to sell you stuff, like specific products. Obviously, they are selling you a program. You can buy into their program, but if they're trying to sell you actual things, just stay away from that. Anything that doesn't encourage regular physical activity in conjunction with healthy eating, because losing weight is not just changing your diet, it's also exercising. You can lose still some weight just by changing how you eat, but if you really want to get on that weight loss journey, you have to exercise too. The two work together. You can't have one without the other. And anything that says you don't need exercise to be able to lose weight on this program is going to be a major red flag. Another red flag: any program that does not employ counselors trained in nutrition. So that can be a nutritionist, a dietitian, anybody who actually has nutrition training, as opposed to David and I were talking about this before the show, like a sales associate, basically somebody who's just there to sell you on things. They're not actually trained in nutrition, but they are there to sell you on the nutrition programs. Stay away
That
from
includes
those.
your local GNC guy as well.
Yeah.
Unless, well, to be fair, unless they can flash like, oh, I actually have, I dietitian certificate or whatever, which usually I believe is a master's program.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, my second question would be like, damn man, I guess job number 2, but power to you, But another thing is, when it comes to the terminology, anybody can claim to be a nutritionist.
That too.
It's not like a certified profession or there's no regulatory board. However, to be a dietitian, you do require a certain degree of education. I don't believe it's a PhD, but I do believe it's a master's. That's what you need in order to, at least in Canada, to be registered with Dietitians of Canada. So also you could visit. In fact, I had a conversation with my physiotherapist. You can visit I forget the word. It's not a naturopath. You can carry on, Matt. I'm just figuring this one out real quick.
Naturopath. Yeah, basically anybody who same with fitness. Like, you don't want to be taking fitness advice from somebody who's not at least a personal trainer. Just like you wouldn't want to be taking nutrition advice from somebody who's not qualified in nutrition. So stay away from those types of people. Any programs that promote an unsafe or an unproven weight loss remedies, such as supplements, fat burners, any kind of weight loss product. We're going to talk about those later in the show. And for the most part, those are all unproven. There are some that are better than others, but a lot of them, your mileage may vary, and there's a bunch of different studies or no studies at all to talk about the efficacy of these products. So just kind of be wary if they are trying to sell you on, look at these fat burners, look at this fat burning tea that we're going to try and sell you. And then lastly, anything that provides nutrition advice not backed up by scientific evidence, you will want to stay away from, because just as anything regarding your body, science first. Anything that's just kind of like a pseudoscience, or if you meditate 3 times a week, you'll lose weight, something like that. Like, we want to stay away from anything that's not purely scientific based, because your body, especially when it comes to nutrition and weight loss and stuff like that, it's not really something you want to play around with. It's something you want to do right, and you want to follow the science, you want to follow the studies and the people who have put in the work to try and figure out the most effective way of doing these things.
And I guess something else to say really quickly is, again, not when we say science-based, we mainly say evidence-based, and evidence-based can vary depending on what studies you use to back them up. Again, not all studies are created equal, so in some methods, there's varying degrees of success here and there. Some of the methods that we discuss may have been the general consensus, like this is how you do it 20 years ago, but now times change. So the general recommendation is, always be a little bit skeptical of what you try. And if you are trying something, always make sure, for the most part, you're keeping in touch with a medical professional. You're checking your blood work. You're doing, all the things that you need to do to ensure, hey, this is working or this isn't working, because there's some might, some individual might come with all the studies and this and that, but it may just not be applicable for you.
Right. Yeah. So I guess going off of that, then the first kind of, and this is just a very basic, straightforward method that some people will use that's not necessarily great, like we talked about, is calorie restriction. Now, there's a good way to do it and a bad way to do it, but basically, calorie restriction is just restricting your calories to reduce your average calorie intake below the typical or average amount that you'd be taking through the day, just while maintaining a healthy intake of all your essential nutrients. So basically, just taking all the food that you eat and eating less of it, to break it down to in simplest terms. Um, Again, as long as you're staying within a healthy enough calorie range, there's no problem with this. It's literally just the philosophy of eat less. That's it. It's as simple as that. But when you start to eat less than you should, then you start to encounter health problems. Um, or if you're not eating at all, then serious health problems. But making sure you're keeping all the essential nutrients that you need to put into your body to function, but you are just limiting your calories, bringing them back a little bit, which can be done safely. Like if your daily caloric intake is like 2,100 calories, bring that down to 1,600, right? That's a 500 calorie deficit per day. Over the week, that's going to be what, 500 times 7, 3,500 calories?
I muted myself because I don't know if you could hear like some of the, like them cutting the grass outside, but
That's 3,500 calories. So that's going to be 1 pound of body
of tissue
of weight lost per week. So yeah, if you're on 2,100, cut that back by 500 calories per day. That's going to add up eventually to 1 pound of body weight per week, and that is within that healthy weight loss structure. But again, you're at 2,100, you cut that back to 1,200. You're at a calorie deficit of 1,000 a day. You're going to be cutting out 7,000 calories a week, which is good. Honestly, that might be fine too, because that's at the upper range. That's going to be 2 pounds of body weight per week, but there's still nothing entirely wrong with that. But you just don't want to go over that, or at least not for an extended amount of time. And like David said, anybody who's like actually overweight and obese, when they start the dieting process, they are similar to actually working out, is like the principle of diminishing returns. They're going to see a huge weight loss initially, and then it's going to slow down. Just like when we work out, you're going to see a huge pump initially, and then as you progress, the gains are not going to be as visible. So just like working out, just how people lose motivation for working out, weight loss can be the same, because you can lose a lot of weight, you can feel great and motivated about it, but then after a certain time, that weight loss is going to slow down, and it's just going to be well, depending on how long you want to do it for, but a long and just grueling process of losing that weight. But at the end of the day, it's going to be worth it. The important thing to note as well, when we talk about reducing that caloric intake and losing that weight, is our body does this thing that we like to call the set point theory. Now, what that is basically your body, it's just homeostasis essentially. So there's a certain weight that your body just likes to be. So you can go over that amount or you can go under that amount, but the theory suggests that you're always going to return to that set point. So if you're 250 pounds, yeah, you can lose 30 pounds, but if you don't continue with it, your body's just going to naturally shoot you back up from 220 to 250. Now you can move your set point, which is kind of increasing our metabolism, because our metabolism is what's going to cause all of that. So it is possible to adjust your set point, but it's going to take time and it's going to take work. That's why a lot of people will gain the weight back after they lost it, because their body is comfortable at a certain weight. Even though they lost that weight, their body naturally wants to put them back, which is more of a survival response, because we don't need to have a whole bunch of fat on our bodies to survive the winter and keep us warm. But our bodies have not told us, our bodies have not adapted to that yet. That's why we like the fatty foods. That's why we like the sugary foods, because that's what our body wants, to fatten us up for the winters and keep us warm. That's just the natural response. So you need to fight our body's natural response over the course of evolution. Decrease that set point, increase that metabolism, and that's how we lose weight and keep the weight off, essentially. Do you have anything to add to that?
I was gonna quickly add, when it comes to weight gain or weight loss periods, from what I recommend, or not what I recommend, from what I understand, the certain some people will recommend, depending on the length of the weight loss gainer phase, that
Mm-hmm.
you would run a maintenance phase of at least 2/3 to 3/4 of the phase that you spent in whatever state that you were, in order to allow one, you to develop the habits to try and maintain that new weight, and then, two, for all the physiological processes in your body to occur, to basically allow you to, feel comfortable at that weight point before you try, you make another push, or if you want to make a push, another push at all.
Right.
That's something I would say, like, set, a goal of however many weeks, depending on if it's weight gain or loss, probably like anywhere from like 8 to 16, and then maintain your weight for at least 2/3 to 3/4 of that time before deciding you want to push again, or if you want to do it again at all. Because either or, you accumulate some type of fatigue, either from, stuffing yourself to a certain extent, or what's it called, or when being in a calorie deficit over an extended period of time.
Right. So, can we explain how to change our set point? Yeah, essentially, it's literally over time, your body is going to get used to it. But that's why the consistency is important, because you need to just pick away at it. What'll happen when you revert to your set point is because you have not been in that caloric deficit long enough. Your metabolism has not adapted and has not increased. So basically, time is really the biggest thing that's going to help adjust your set point. Your set point can increase as well, and it's a lot easier to go up in weight than it is to lose weight, and it's a lot easier to increase your set point than it is to decrease your set point. So time and consistency is going to be the major key of how you're actually going to change your set point. Hopefully that answered your question. But
Also, we have to take in mind that the set point theory is also simply a theory,
yeah,
for the most part. We couldn't say everybody has like a resting state where their body like always wants to be in, because depending also on your level of muscularity and stuff like that, if you begin resistance training, things in that, like your body's demands change for the most part, so that's also a factor, not just simple like fat or body fat, loss or gain,
all right.
So you just have to really experiment with I would say the most important thing is just building sustainable habits over an extended period of time. So when you do get a period where you're like, okay, I'm happy with this, I want to maintain it, all that really changes in your food consumption is, pulling something away, or not even pulling foods in and out. It's primarily just reducing portions. That's what I find the most sustainable. If your diet remains fairly consistent over an extended period of time, but all you do is just reduce portions or increase portions.
Right. So moving on here to kind of the more sensationalized diets that are out there, calorie restriction just being the main basic one, just the pure basic simplest way to do it. We've got what's called if it fits your macros. So this was a diet specifically developed. A lot of these are going to be specifically developed by somebody who's trying to create their own diet. So if it fits your macros diet, it's basically a type of flexible dieting that helps people lose weight without actually feeling overly restricted. So rather than focusing on calories, if it fits your macros tracks macronutrients instead. So your protein, your fats, and your carbohydrates, just like we talked about in episode 2 and we talked about macro distribution, this is just going to focus on those 3 macronutrients. I think, well, technically alcohol and fiber are technically considered macronutrients, but for the most part you really just want to focus on the protein, fat, and carbs. So this is going to allow a lot more flexibility, because this means that all foods can be enjoyed as long as they fit into your macros for the day. So you can basically eat whatever you want as long as the macronutrient distribution is following the guideline that has been set. So the idea is pretty simple. You need to know how many calories your body burns in your average day. So your total daily energy expenditures. So just like we did in episode 2, we had the BMR calculation. So for the total daily energy expenditure, you want to calculate your BMR, which is going to be your basal metabolic rate. So that's how many calories your body uses in its resting state. You want to
Essentially, if you just did nothing all day.
yeah, you want to multiply that by your activity factor. So depending on what chart you use, there's different multipliers for your activity factor, but it usually goes from like sedentary, lightly active, moderately active, and highly active. Most people are probably going to be within that sedentary to lightly active range. So you're going to take your BMR, that base calorie. Honestly, if your activity factor is like sedentary, it's literally just a multiplier of 1. So there is no math to do there. But if you are lightly active or higher, there's going to be a slight modification to it. So take that BMR times activity factor. That is going to be your total daily energy expenditure. That is how many calories you're going to burn, or you want to be able to like put out in a day, essentially. So when we talk about if it fits your macros, you want to take that number and then you want to eat 15 to 20% less calories than that number, as per the calorie deficit model that we've previously talked about. So taking that daily energy expenditure, eating 15% to 20% less than that. And then you want to split those calories between fat, protein, and carbs. So like we talked before, you want to remember that 1 gram of fat is going to be equal to 9 calories. A gram of protein is going to have 4 calories, and a gram of carbohydrates is going to have 4 calories. So understanding those splits, you can kind of adjust your macronutrients to fit into that daily caloric intake. So some examples of things you can kind of use to work with this. Obviously, you still want to stay within healthy foods. I think everyone, for the most part, understands what a healthy food is as opposed to an unhealthy food. But we talk about foods high in protein, so obviously animal meats, so beef, chicken, lamb, pork, turkey, anything that's going to be meat protein. You got dairy products, cheese, milk, protein, yogurt. Eggs are going to be fantastic. Anything legumes, beans, lentils, peanuts, peas and soy are going to be really good. Quinoa is great. Seafood. All of those, and making sure that when we are trying to figure all that out, it is kind of tedious to look on the back of a nutrition label and see, okay, well, this has 4 grams of protein. That means in this 4 grams of protein, there's going to be 16 calories worth of protein. So that's 16 calories going into my daily energy expenditure, minus 15-20%. So understanding you're breaking down those macros, and as long as it fits, so if it fits your macros, you're good to go. We talk about foods high in fats, so that's going to be that 9 grams, or that 9 calories per gram. So avocados are going to be great. Egg yolks, anything fatty fish. So fish, it's a little bit of double whammy there, because you can get protein and fat. They're both going to be great for that. Any full fat dairy products, so your cheese, your cream, your whole milk, mayonnaise, nuts are also going to be a good fat source. Oils from fruits, nuts, and seeds. So yeah, and then olive oil, and then seeds like chia and flax seeds are going to be good. Understanding that we're making sure we are getting and trying to fit in 9 calories per gram. So again, if we have 3 grams of fat, that's going to be what, 21, right? 9 times 3.
Give me 1 second, I'll be back.
All right, David's leaving. If my math is wrong, I think 18 plus, no, sorry, it's 28. I think that's still wrong, actually. Anyways, you understand what I'm saying. You want to add up those calories per gram, essentially. Moving on to carbs, good sources of carbs. We got bread, obviously, cereals, pasta, any baked goods. Legumes are still going to be a really good source of carbohydrates. Grains like oats, wheats, barley, rye, and rice. And when we talk about grains specifically, you'll see a lot on packaging. You'll have whole grain and whole wheat. If you can, try and source out whole grain. And like some of them I can't think specifically, but like there's usually like a little logo or something that's like specifies it's like whole grain certified or something. Gravitate towards those, because whole grain is going to be a lot less processed than whole wheat. Like you've got like you'll go to the grocery store and you'll see your white bread, which is just straight up processed bread. Try and stay away from white bread. Not a whole lot of nutritional value in there. Then you've got your brown bread, which is that whole wheat bread, but it's still going to be highly, highly processed. And then you'll see like those whole grain breads, like they've got like even like a darker texture, more of a gritty. They might have like nuts or seeds or something on the outside. Try and gravitate towards those because it is the whole grain. It's not as processed as the whole wheat or the white bread. So if you are getting your carbs from bread, whole grain.
I just quickly wanted to jump in there, and when we say whole grain and whole grain over these processed foods, what we mean by process is when certain carbohydrates or other meats and stuff like that, or fats, whatever, are processed, a lot of micronutrients are lost in the processing. For some reasons, well, for some products, if we look at bread for an example, the reason they are processed is to there are various different factors. One could be simply processed foods like bread, and other white breads have added sugar in order to make them more appetizing, in order for you to eat more and thus to buy more. While if you include grains and stuff like that, sometimes the taste isn't the best, but also they are a little bit more satiating, which would indicate that you probably aren't going to buy as much because you aren't as inclined to eat as much of these foods, which is why they're typically more expensive for the most part. Also, something to consider, um, you don't necessarily always have to veer away from these foods. If you're somebody who's trying to put on a little bit of weight, including some, along with your whole grain foods, but including maybe some white bread or some more processed carbohydrate sources are positive in the sense that they are higher glycemic, which means they digest very quickly, which means you can get more food in. So, at the end of the day, there's when it comes to the processing of food, the only real processed stuff you likely want to stay away from are trans and to a certain extent saturated fat, but really it comes down to ensuring you get enough of whole foods and the micronutrients while enjoying a little bit of the more processed foods, as long as ideally they're not trans or saturated fats, if that's something that you can fit into your diet, and that if depending on your overall goals and stuff like that. Overall, it's a little bit complex, but those are some recommendations I just kind of wanted to throw out there.
Right. So yeah, just making sure you understand the caloric split from all your macronutrients, um, and making sure you are like obviously you don't want your entire caloric intake to be from fat. There are certain percentages. When we talk about not periodization, but just the distribution, um, which we did talk about in one of our previous episodes. I'm just trying to remember what the split was for the macros. David, do you remember what they
I
were?
believe for fats, from what I understand, the maximum recommendation is about 30% of your calories coming from fats. Believe 30
Oh,
to 50%
hold on,
from
I found it. So
carbohydrates. You
carbs
got it?
are 45 to 65%.
Okay.
Protein you want to be 10 to 35%, and fat you want to be 20 to 35%. And this is on a balanced macro diet. But what we're going to move into now is what happens when you reduce a certain macro, um, or cut it out completely, and that's how we get into low carb and low fat diets. So David, tell us a little bit about low carb diets.
So when it comes to the two that I'm gonna cover are gonna be low carbohydrate and low fat today. When it comes to our low carbohydrate and low fat diet, these are probably going to be the most common diets that any individual who has experimented with, losing weight or generally just trying to change their eating habits has probably heard of. Simply put, a low carb diet involves restricting your consumption of carbohydrates. So, as we said before, vegetable based products such as bread, fruits, vegetables, and other grains. Typically, the purpose of a low carbohydrate diet is going to be weight loss. Other examples or other conditions that we're not really going to touch into is also diabetes, which is a varying degree of playing around with your carbohydrates to manipulate your insulin sensitivity, but that's a whole other conversation for a different podcast. I'm going to quickly go over exactly why low carb diets even kind of came into like popularity, especially in Western diets, and why it even still exists today. In fact, I was pretty surprised when I was doing my research for this episode to see how far low carbohydrate diets actually dated back. So I remember actually, I don't believe I have the article pulled up, but I'll probably reference it a little bit later. But I found a timeline of how when the first low carbohydrate or mention of limiting carbohydrates for general health even came up. And from what I found, the first in recorded history, or not, it was before this, but the most momentous, I guess, example that I found was in between 1863 to 1869. This individual named William Banting, he promoted a low carb diet for weight loss and general health, which was one of the first instances of when low carb dieting was ever brought up. Another important instance would be 1921. This is when actually the keto diet was first used by doctors to treat epilepsy in children. Quick little note on this, we're going to touch on it a little bit later when it comes to the keto diet. When they first started using it, it was I believe, again, so it was used to treat epilepsy in children for a maximum of I believe it was 2 years at a time, as they found like the effects just ended up being debilitating. But we'll talk about that later afterwards. In 1972, the first Dr. Atkins diet, which we'll talk about as well, was released, which promoted high protein and fat consumption. And from the early 2000s to the 2010s, various sugar-free diets have gained popularity and pretty much still exist to this day. And the current most popular iteration of basically a low carbohydrate diet is the keto diet at the moment, which we keep saying we'll talk about a little bit more. So, rationale: why the low carbohydrate diet, specifically in regards to weight loss and some other just weight loss in this instant. It depends. It depends on who you ask, whether it be a medical professional or just a random person, why they're doing the diet. Number one, the assumption that carbs make you fat or make you more likely to gain fat. To explain this, I guess the preface is that's simply not true, and I'm going to explain a little bit of science as to why that's not true. So this is the rationale behind why people think scientifically carbs make you fat. When we eat carbs, the simplest, most broken down form of carbohydrates called glucose. Our gut's going to break it down to make it more suitable for absorption. Afterwards, after it's been absorbed, that glucose is let me actually move back a little bit. After it's been absorbed into the gut, it's going to be absorbed into the bloodstream, which will not immediately, but over an extended period of time, raise our blood sugar levels depending on the carbohydrate consumed, which is going to trigger the release of a hormone called insulin. This is the important part where the claims kind of come from. Insulin, basically what it does is allows our body's cells, wherever which cell needs the carbohydrate, the glucose, to absorb it from the bloodstream and then use it as energy wherever it's needed. Also, aside from signaling glucose to enter our bloodstream, insulin also has the job of signaling another organ called the liver to store that excess glucose as glycogen. So, quick little just backtrack. Glucose, it's what's the most broken down form of that carbohydrate. Glycogen is that stored form of glucose in the body. The liver can only store a certain amount of glycogen at a time, so what's left gets converted to fat for long-term storage. That is pretty much the key component where all these promoters of low-fat diets kind of latch onto. This idea that the liver can only store so much glycogen, so that extra, if you consume extra, is going to be immediately stored as fat. And that's what they latch onto to promote these low-carb diets. If we follow this line of thinking, you can easily come to the conclusion that the best way to control your level of body fat gain is to reduce your insulin response. And we do that by essentially restricting carbohydrate consumption to bias adipose tissue or simply body fat as the body's main energy source, which any person who's in a calorie deficit is going to want to do. They want to put their body in a state where they're eating so little food that their actual tissue is being used as energy. In order to do that, you would then assume, oh, I just got to reduce carbohydrate because that's going to stop this, I guess, signaling of sending it to be body fat. In regards to how this hypothesis has held up in regards to research and other studies, basically, various studies over the last several decades, what they've done is, in order to determine if this is true or not, they'll use these, forget the actual term for it, but essentially what occurs is you grab a certain number of subjects, you place them in a lab-controlled environment where they stay throughout the entirety of the study. From what I read, the majority of these studies were between 2 to 6 weeks. And while they're in these studies or in these labs, their movement and food take are all controlled and tracked. So, as we discussed earlier, the most important aspect when it comes to weight loss is energy being consumed versus energy being expended. And these studies are basically controlling all of that. So, in order to determine exactly if they're in a surplus or deficit to determine if this works or not. The results were pretty clear that when calories and protein are both controlled, there's no energy expenditure. Okay, so what they did is when you control calories and protein, and they compared the two groups, people who were in a low-carb diet versus a non-low-carb diet, once those two factors are controlled, there was no difference, indicating that the most important factor when it came to weight loss was not the basically distribution of the macronutrients, but just simply, again, that ratio of calories in versus calories out. So that's to put that theory that, or that belief that carbs make you fat because they're carbohydrates. That's not true. Simply just a myth, and various studies have proven that to be. The second reason or rationale why you might go on a low-carb diet are that carbs typically can be pretty highly palatable foods or just tasty foods that you want to eat. And by reducing or limiting their consumption, it makes it easier to control calories. This is a perfectly valid reason, for any individual to choose a low-carb diet. Makes complete sense. If you're very likely to eat these foods, just eliminate them from your diet. Carbohydrates, particularly our high-sugar processed carbohydrates, are typically pretty calorie-dense, so they have a lot of calories for the amount of space that they actually fill up in your stomach, and are often the reason for many people's cravings. Pretty well known that sugar, as well as dietary fat, are some of them, when combined with foods, are pretty much the main reason why these foods are highly desired and can trigger cravings and stuff like that. So why not eliminate them? When you reduce one's carbohydrate consumption, you automatically, again, restrict a large amount of different food groups, which is going to decrease your overall calorie consumption. So at the end of the day, by reducing carbs, you reduce calories, which comes back to our point. Calories in versus calories out is what actually dictates weight loss or weight gain. So those are the rationales. Now we can move into pros and cons of low-carb dieting for weight loss. Again, we're going to stick to weight loss and stay away from just general health, just because that becomes a little bit more of a complicated conversation. And it's usually not the reason for why people go on these diets. So, pros. When you reduce or eliminate an entire macronutrient, you're not 100% certain, but you can be fairly certain even without tracking calories, depending on what your usual eating habits are. Again, it's all going to depend on somebody's individual situation. You will probably be in a calorie deficit, which if is your goal, good job. You've set yourself up for success initially. And by eliminating, again, not an entire food group, but by restricting your consumption of certain amounts of these foods, you reduce the chances of cheating on your diet by removing the presence of these, highly palatable and calorie-dense foods. So those are going to be our two pros that I could think of, or that I researched as well. Matt, can you think of any other pros?
Not quite. That's pretty much the succinct way to put it.
Okay.
It's pretty much just, it really just depends on individuality at that point.
Pretty much. And then when you look at our cons, I can consider myself a little bit biased, but I'm gonna run through the list that we got right here. Carbohydrates are the body's preferred energy source, as they can be mobilized for energy more quickly than protein and fats. We discussed this in our previous episode. And chronic fatigue is a pretty common symptom for individuals who follow a chronically low carbohydrate diet. Those two, statements, it's not coincidentally that I made them right after each other. When you consume less carbohydrate, which is, again, your body's preferred energy source, you are probably going to be, in fact, not probably, most people who go on a keto diet or a low-carb diet, they do find themselves extremely sluggish over an extended period of time and can have stuff like nausea, headaches, and stuff like that, simply by not having enough readily, quickly available energy if the majority of their food is consumed from fats or protein. Another con is going to be that restricting your carbohydrate intake is specifically micronutrient-dense carbohydrates like fruits, vegetables, and whole grains is pretty much putting yourself in a situation where you're at risk for micronutrient deficiencies, which over time can result in a bunch of different various health problems developing. So that's a second con. A third con is You also run the risk of being low in fiber, which puts you at risk for constipations and other gut and bowel issues over an extended period of time. Again, you could maybe get over this by excuse me, by taking a fiber supplement, but again, if you simply switch to supplements, you're losing out on a lot of other micronutrients. And the final con that I had was that diets typically low in carbohydrates are also high in dietary fat. If the dietary fat you're consuming comes from polyunsaturated or monounsaturated fats, this isn't too much of a concern. But if the majority of your fat intake comes from saturated and, more importantly, trans fat, then you run the risk of increased LDL cholesterol levels, which puts you at a risk for cardiovascular disease. Again, that's going to depend on the amount of dietary fat that you're consuming, which has to be fairly substantial in order to make sure your calorie deficit isn't as aggressive as it could be. So, now that we've kind of weighed up all the different aspects of the low carb diet, its history, pros and cons, exactly why it works the way it does, we can kind of come to a verdict in regards to who is it probably recommended for and probably who it isn't. So, who is a low carbohydrate diet recommended or acceptable for? One, individuals who struggle to control their carbohydrate intake, fall victim to cravings, even though, but again, even then, if this is a situation, you should still ensure that fruits, vegetables, and fibrous multigrain carbs should be kept in your rotation for general health. These foods are not very calorie dense at all. And the fact they'll probably aid in your calorie deficit if that's the goal, simply due to the fact of having quite a lot of volume in your stomach, which increases your satiety, which makes sure that you're going to essentially stay full for longer for very little calories. The second individual who it might be acceptable for are people who just simply feel better and are objectively healthier, eating a higher fat and protein diet. Of course, to determine this, you're gonna probably have to, not probably, you're definitely gonna have to review your blood work, consult with your doctor, and possibly speak with a dietitian over an extended period of time. The average person is definitely not, I can't say qualified enough to understand their own body. Over a certain amount of time, you eventually will be able to determine, this sits well with me, this doesn't. But in order to get a good idea of what's going on behind the scenes, the finer details of your health, seeking a professional is probably the best idea, rather than simply saying, yeah, I feel moderately good on low carbohydrates, I'm going to stick with it over an extended period of time, especially if you have a risk of various different chronic diseases. Diabetes is a big one that I could think of, where carbohydrates, it's very important to be managing and to be managing that for general health. So those are people who we could say that it's acceptable for, or yeah, acceptable for. When it comes to people who it's definitely not acceptable for, or probably just not recommended for, the first population that I could definitely think of are athletes. For anyone with athletic or physical performance related goals, running a low carb diet puts you at a pretty severe disadvantage in comparison to your competition, as carbohydrates are the body's preferred energy sport. Any athlete who primarily relies on immediate bursts of energy, or immediate, you could say, like speed, strength, power athletes, carbohydrates are extremely important, especially readily and quickly digestible carbohydrates, to make sure your performance is up there in order to match your competition. You could argue that long distance athletes like marathon runners could benefit from lower carbohydrates and consuming higher amounts of fat, as for various different physiological reasons, fat is metabolized or mobilized as fuel a lot slower. So you could argue that, but still, regardless, I'm still going to say that if you go low carb and you're an athlete, or you have some like performance goals, you're setting yourself up for failure if you go low carb. Second population are going to be people who suffer from cardiovascular disease, fatty liver disease, micronutrients such as fiber deficiency, and some other ailments related to not getting enough nutrients from carbohydrates. However, if an individual replaces certain palatable processed carbohydrates with plant-based carbs and protein, this can kind of change this recommendation. But the main question is, at this point, is including plant-based, basically a vegetarian diet, and making sure the primary source of fat is in saturated or trans fat, is that really a low carb diet at that point? Which I guess is debatable, but I'm gonna go with that. Another population group is if you've already experimented running a low carbohydrate diet and you find you suffer from chronic fatigue, headaches, or your blood work and other health markers are objectively worse, then you probably wouldn't want to run a low carb diet again because simply the cons most likely outweigh the benefits. For the most part, it's usually weight loss. At that point, simply manipulating your macronutrient distribution to include more carbohydrates and maybe speaking to a professional is probably better for your long-term health. And then the final population group it's getting to a long talk, is going to be inexperienced or simply yo-yo dieters. And what I mean by yo-yo are simply people who jump from diet to diet and don't really stick to it for an extended period of time, either because they don't see quick enough results or simply don't see results at all. This advice is basically going to go for all the diets we're going to discuss, so I'm not going to bring this point up again. If you're someone who's never really maintained a diet, or we could say even just a nutrition plan is another way to phrase it, for an extended period of time successfully, we could say maybe anywhere from 6 to 20 weeks. Someone who jumps from fad diet to fad diet, excuse me, or someone who doesn't really grasp the concept of maintaining a sustainable calorie balance, you're likely better off speaking to a qualified health professional. The reason I say that is more than often than not, a lot of inexperienced dieters are going to appeal these diets as the end-all be-all without really a good understanding of their own bodies and the habits they need to instill to make long-term sustainable progress. You know, over an extended period of time, simply just saying low carbs, low carbs, low carbs is not something that your body is probably going to respond well to after you've lost the weight, and you might end up in a place where you simply rebound because you never set up some healthy, sustainable goals to make sure that this life adjustment was something for the long term. Saying that, though, this is saying that you can't be successful in losing weight or seeing some health benefits from experimenting with your diet, in this case, low carb. However, the key isn't to be successful in the short term, but like I said, to instill the habits that help you sustain this change in the long term. Essentially, my overall recommendation is be honest with yourself, and if you feel like you don't necessarily have the experience to read your own body or simply the nutrition information to go about, achieving your goals, there's no shame in getting some help from your doctor, dietitian, or other professional if you have questions or you simply just need somewhere to start from. So that's gonna be low carb dieting. Have anything to add to that, Matt? Sure. I'm going to continue. We're going to move with a low-fat diet. So, other side of the coin. We've gone with.
Hold on, I was on mute. Um,
Okay.
yeah, so we've got intermittent fasting coming up just after
Oh no,
this.
you were good. I heard you.
Well, no, I was on like mute for the stream.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
But yeah, we're just gonna talk about low-fat diet, and then we'll get into intermittent fasting right after that.
Okay, so like I said, opposite side of the coin, we have low carbohydrate diets that have been popular, have recently become very popular, and then we have low fat diets that also have a similar history in regards to coming in and out of popularity with the public. So, low fat diets, what are they? Similar to low carbohydrate diets, it involves simply restricting the consumption of dietary fat. This is typically going to be animal-based products such as dairy and fattier meats, but also can include plant-based fats such as some cooking oils, nuts, seeds, etc. The purpose of low-fat diets, these actually have a history rooted in bettering health, such as managing LDL cholesterol levels and cardiovascular disease, and more recently, they've been associated with weight loss and even sport performance, as I mentioned earlier, biasing carbohydrates for athletes and stuff like that. So this one has a little bit more of a rich history, which I'm going to quickly gloss over. If you want to read the full article or the full paper that I pulled this from, it's called How the Ideology of Low Fat Conquered America in the Journal of the History of Medicine and Allied Sciences. Pretty good read in regards to how this kind of came to be and why it became so popular. So, some notable moments in history that in regards to low-fat diets during the early 90s, or simply the pre-World War II, or even right around the World War I era, the beauty standard for middle and upper class, specifically white women, became slimmer. for the more really revealing close of the 1920s. Various like magazine publications began popping up in tabloids and other magazines, and these were with or without doctors' input. Some were, some weren't. Promoting calorie counting as the method of choice was actually surprised me that all the way back then in the early 1900s, they still had the information around relevant to calorie counting and stuff like that. That was the first thing that they came out of, which even to this day, a lot of people don't even realize as the key when it comes to weight gain or weight loss. But I digress. Because protein and carbs possess 4 calories per gram, while fat possesses 9 calories per gram, fat was naturally the first macronutrient targeted for weight loss all the way back then, which in fact makes sense even to this day. In the 1940s, coronary heart disease was a leading cause of death in the U.S., so scientists and physicians sought out to determine why. Quick, I guess, caveat before I continue. All this study was conducted in the U.S., which again was biased to a certain extent because U.S. culture is a little bit different than other aspects of the Western world, but we can still kind of take it as a pretty good determinant of what was going on in other countries, for the most part. Again, so during the 1940s, various studies determined there was a strong correlation between diets high in saturated fat and cholesterol and coronary heart disease. This was known as the diet heart. This is on the word hypothesis. It wasn't proven. I'm going to quickly cover this other point here. In 1957, the American Heart Association, or the AHA, proposed that the modification of dietary fat intake would reduce the incidence of coronary heart disease. In 1961, same organization, they published a report on the prevention of coronary heart disease that singled out reducing certain kinds of dietary fat intake as a way to lower the level of risk of, I believe, was it in this point? Of obesity during this point. So, but during this period, they also did, they highlighted the fact that this wasn't finalized research and they should still have a little bit of caution when making recommendations. In 1977, the U.S. Senate, they published something called the Dietary Goals in the United States, which was the first time any branch of government made a statement of the risk factors for the American diet, and it was the first time that an actual federal government body told Americans to eat more fruits, vegetables, whole grains, poultry, fish, and to eat fewer higher fat foods and to substitute non-fat for a whole milk. So that was pretty much the game changer during this period. It was the first time the government said, okay, move to low fat because people are dying of coronary heart disease and some other things, even before letting the research kind of fully develop and make sure that this is something that they can actually publish with full confidence that this is truthful. Another important period, 1983, with the publication of an article based on these set of studies called the Framingham studies. They cited obesity as an independent risk factor for heart disease. This finding lent further support to the low-fat approach because scientists believe that low-fat diets might not only prevent coronary heart disease but also promote weight loss, thereby reducing the incidence of obesity. This became the general consensus from this point onwards until the late 2000s, despite skepticism from many within the medical community. So, another big game-changing point, 1983. Not only is basically low-fat diets associated with better heart health, but now it's also associated with lower incidences of obesity without maybe the necessary data to back it up, which kind of moves into this current climate of, low fat means also weight loss as well. Some other important periods.
So I think we should just move on from this.
Okay.
Because honestly, the history of these, specifically this diet, is almost irrelevant for what we're trying to get through. So let's kind of get into the rationale of why we should be working with a low-fat diet.
Sure. There's one tiny little point I also want to mention is that basically in response to this, food companies, they pivoted and they were like, oh shit, we're going to have to change our whole marketing, all the contents of our food. And what they decided to do is they replaced a lot of the fat found in these foods with sugar, which basically transitioned the American diet from being high in like trans and saturated fat to then being high in sugar, which never really resolved the whole issue of the obesity pandemic that was, or epidemic that was kind of coming in and relevant to this day. So that's essentially why, even with reducing, Americans' consumption of fats, some aspects of like cardiovascular disease and obesity still remained because calories were never changed. It was all essentially balanced and nothing really happened. So that's a little complicated history of why low fat dieting is even a thing. When we look at the rationale behind why even to do a low fat diet, similar to a low carb diet, it also depends. The first one is going to be similar to carbohydrates, the assumption that fat makes you fat, which I guess when you first hear it, as somebody who doesn't maybe understand the intricacies of diet, you might say, oh, this makes perfect sense. Dietary fat, body fat, probably the same thing. Well, that's not true. As mentioned in the history of low-fat diets, due to the eagerness of all these scientists and researchers, they kind of put out this narrative that, that dietary fat is the main culprit for heart disease and obesity, which if you're a, average individual, you'd be like, oh, okay, that makes sense, to a certain extent. Fat contains all these calories. If I cut out fat, that means I'm probably going to lose fat. Unfortunately, the general public, not as educated as scientists, who would have thought? So a lot of people simply, they ran with this logical conclusion that if they're saying eat less fat, that means that's going to equal less body fat, which still, for a lot of people, that's their rationale for going low fat. Number two, low fat diets are beneficial for preventing heart disease. This was essentially the question that the majority of early researchers on low fat dieting were trying to figure out. So what does the current research say? Well, depends on who you ask. Saturated fat's impact on health has been pretty contentious for the last couple decades. Current research indicates that the link between saturated fat and heart disease is not as strong as previously thought. However, there is some evidence to suggest that replacing saturated fat with primarily polyunsaturated fat and monounsaturated fats, which we would call healthier fats, like in olive oil, avocado, other plant-based fat sources, do have some positive effects on heart health. Essentially, what the research also says is, rather than cutting dietary fat completely, prioritizing those polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fats, consuming whole foods, and keeping control of total calorie balance is pretty much what's the priority for maintaining good heart health. But in some circles, the research is a little bit contentious. If we move on, number 3, some dietary fats are highly palatable foods and high in calories, thus by reducing them or eliminating their consumption, it makes it easier to control calories. Also, that's actually a fairly valid point if you're somebody who's reducing your fats in order to lose weight. As I mentioned earlier, sugars and dietary fats are pretty palatable. So if you reduce those, also if you reduce a food group where the calories are very high, you're pretty much setting yourselves up for success if weight loss is going to be your goal. And the final point, which quickly I'll just say, carbohydrates are more beneficial for athletic performance. Don't really need to explain that too much. As I mentioned earlier, carbs are pretty much the preferred source for your body when it comes to performance. So why not reduce fat and increase your carbohydrates to make sure you perform better? So that's pretty much all the rationale behind why to do a low carb diet, or why some people have picked it. Now, again, we move to our pros and cons. Our pros: by reducing or eliminating an entire macronutrient group, you can pretty much be fairly certain that you're going to be a calorie deficit. Again, this depends this is all individual based on calories in versus calories out. You reduce the chances of cheating on your diet by removing the presence of pretty highly palatable and calorie-dense foods. Another pro, that's why you could reduce it. Reducing the chances of consuming less healthier foods containing trans fats is also positive, not just for weight loss, but now we're talking about just overall general health. And increasing the consumption of dietary protein and carbohydrates is pretty beneficial for performance. So we got 4 pros, which honestly doing better than doing a low carb diet from what I talked about earlier. Cons. So when it comes to this, doing a low fat diet, in theory, we could say, okay, it's fairly positive for health, but we also have to talk about what does low fat mean to to an individual. Low fat to one person might just be like less than that 30%, 20 to 30% recommendation. Low fat to other people might be 15 to 10% of total calories from fat, which is pretty much universally categorized as fairly pretty low. The recommendation that I usually go with is no less than 0.3 grams per pound of body weight. Otherwise, you kind of increase your risk of various negative health effects, such as compromised hormone production, nutrient absorption, tissue health interference, which essentially is, your connective tissue, ligaments, tendons, cartilage, all that type of stuff. They all can be compromised if you go way too low in fat. And you also increase the possibility of consuming highly palatable carbohydrates in their place if you're a inexperienced dieter, which would pretty much negate the whole purpose of you doing your diet. So, verdict, fairly short actually. Who is a low-fat diet acceptable for? Athletes, say it again and again, carbohydrates, superior source of fuel in comparison to fats. And debatably, people who suffer from cardiovascular disease. I'm not going to go into the details of saturated in regards to which fats are healthier and which ones aren't. When it comes to saturated fats, debatable, which is that saturated fats raise your LDL cholesterol levels, which makes them unhealthier. Trans fats, pretty much stated in the literature that they're pretty much going to have some negative effects on your cardiovascular health. Who is a low-fat diet not acceptable for? The main one is going to be what I said earlier, people who are simply inexperienced and don't really have a lot of knowledge or a grasp on their nutrition. Matt, you got anything to add on to that?
Not quite. It's really just making sure you understand your macronutrient needs. Like we said before, like if you're in a area where you need that fat, then I would not recommend going on a low carb or low fat diet. Just as I wouldn't recommend going on a low carb diet if, like we talked about, you're an athlete or somebody who needs those carbohydrates. So understanding what kind of macro split works for you, and then what was the point that I had? I literally just evaporated from my head. Oh yes, so if it's not working for you, just stop doing it. That's really the main takeaway from any of these diets, really, that I can think of, is if it's not working, then just stop doing it. There's no reason to continue to do something that doesn't work for you. There's no guideline that says you have to stick to this diet, even if you're not getting what you want out of it. If you're not getting what you want out of a diet, then don't do the diet. Try something else.
Another point to also make is, even if it is, working, you also don't want to be like a slave to the diet you're following, which is the main reason why a lot of people fail in their diets. If they simply follow like, these strict guidelines of like, okay, I can't have this carb, or this carb, without understanding, the actual principles of why it works, which is, as we keep mentioning, calories in versus calories out. You're essentially setting yourself up for failure when you have to get back to normal eating, because you don't necessarily know exactly why it worked to begin with. So again, like, always try and be knowledgeable about what you're doing and why it works, because again, this is your body. You need to be aware of what you're doing. And if you're not, again, like always, speak to a professional. In fact, we didn't even do our disclaimer for this episode. We're not we're not certified nutrition experts. So take what we say with a grain of salt, and yeah.
So I guess moving on here. So that's just the very in detailed description of low fat and low carb diet, which are going to be the two major ones. And a lot of fad diets are going to be kind of based around not only caloric intake, so calories in versus calories out, but kind of playing around and modifying the low carb and the low fat structure, just like the Atkins, keto, any of these diets do. The main one we talk about, well, actually, even before that, I'll talk about intermittent fasting and just fasting in general as a dietary strategy. And I'm sure a lot of people are aware of intermittent fasting, or have heard of it, or know somebody who's currently doing it. And there's different types of intermittent fasting that I want to talk about. Basically, intermittent fasting is an eating pattern that's going to cycle between periods of fasting. So that's not starving yourself, but essentially just not eating and eating. So eating and not eating within a cycle. and it doesn't specify specifically which foods you should be eating, but rather when you need to be eating them. So in this respect, it's not a diet in the conventional sense, but it's more accurately described as an eating pattern. And there's a bunch of different methods you can do. The most popular is going to be the 16-8 method. It's involves basically skipping breakfast, restricting your daily eating period to 8 hours. So, like, typically for most people, that's going to be between 1 to 9 p.m. is when you're going to want to eat. And then you fast, so you don't eat for 16 hours in between. And usually that's pretty much most of that time is spent sleeping. So it's really you just have dinner, like lunch and dinner, basically 1 to 9 p.m., lunch and dinner, go to bed, you wake up, don't have breakfast, repeat the next day. That's your typical 16-8 split for intermittent fasting. There's the eat, stop, eat approach, or what's called OMAD, which I tried actually for about 2 to 3 months, which is basically fasting for 24 hours. There's OMAD is a more extreme version of the eat, stop, eat method. So this is fasting for 24 hours once or twice a week. So basically, you not eating from dinner one day to dinner the next day. Now, OMAD, so 1 meal a day, is what OMAD stands for, is essentially that concept but applied to every day of the week. So you're fasting for 23 hours and you're eating for 1 hour, and you're doing that every day. You're eating for that 1 hour. That 1 hour is the same time every single day, and then you don't eat for another 23 hours. So it's basically you're eating once a day. I tried it. When did I try it or start doing it? I started doing it in maybe October of last year, and pretty much stuck with it for, let's say, until like December.
You were on it for a while. I remember you telling
Yeah,
me.
is when I started to falter a little bit with it. But even still, I'm still on like my own personally modified version of OMAD. Not so much anymore, but for a while after those couple months that I was on it, I was still kind of following the philosophy. So basically, I would figure out first of all how many calories that I wanted to take. And this is also where kind of meal planning comes in as well. I wasn't doing like meal prep, but I was doing meal planning. So I knew every day what I wanted to eat, and when I went to grocery store, I would always buy like basically the same things. I basically ate pretty much the same thing once a day every day for like 2 months straight. But just making sure that I had the right macronutrient split and making sure that I was ingesting enough calories, because with all fasting, the goal is to decrease your calorie intake by only eating certain times of the day, and that's how we lose weight. That calories in versus calories out approach. That being said, especially when you're going to the extreme lengths of it with OMAD, is you want to make sure during that 1 hour that you can eat, you are getting everything you need. Making sure you are getting however many calories that you're trying to get to create that deficit, as well as making sure you have adequate nutrients. So your proteins, your fats, your carbs, all your micro nutrients, so your vitamins, minerals, stuff like that. Making sure that in that 1 meal a day, you are fitting everything you need to function as a healthy human being. So that's kind of the tricky part of it. But if you can not lock that down, I do suggest it. I noticed a significant decrease in my weight for maybe after like 3 weeks. It took for me to really like notice a visible difference. Just 'cause I don't have a scale. I really need to buy a scale, but I've just been putting it off. But so I was just basically going off physical appearance. So based off physical appearance, it was definitely making a difference. It was really hard to get started with it. I think I remember the first night, I caved and ordered fast food at like 3 a.m. because I was just absolutely starving. But after that, I actually started, and it got like after the first week, like it was easy. But like I said, since then, since I've like come off the strict 1 meal a day, I've been kind of following that structure. So like I have one big meal a day, and if I am hungry throughout the day, I'll have like little snacks here and there. But for the most part, like I am not strictly on that breakfast, lunch, and dinner structure where you're separating those calories. Dinner usually being the biggest, but like I don't usually have breakfast. I don't have lunch, and if I am kind of hungry during the day, I'm gonna have something small, something that's going to be nutritionally dense. Um, and something that's going to be filling as well, because I know that, if it's 12 midday afternoon, I'm not going to be eating until 7 p.m. and I'm starving, so I need to make sure whatever I'm going to have now is small enough that it's not going to throw out my fast, but it's just going to last me until then. But I to say I would recommend going on OMAD, it really it varies. And I think like how I did it is I did not do it in conjunction with exercise. Like it was just strictly diet. And I think if I had done it with exercise, I probably would have seen even more significant gains. But the other biggest problem, and this is with all fasting, is when you basically fast and when you change, and this is why you shouldn't like stay on fasting like as a permanent solution. Like this is something you do for a few months and then you go back to a normal diet, because when you fast, basically what happens is you change the amount of calories that your body needs in the day over time. That's like changing your metabolism, changing your BMR, stuff like that. So that's going to lower. But what happened to me essentially is I was continuing to eat this amount of calories that I needed when I started. So at that point, I actually started having a calorie surplus and started gaining weight. So that's the thing with fasting. You need to be careful is either continue, like at a certain point, we talked about calorie restriction. There's only so low you can go with how many calories you need in a day. So if you are fasting and that caloric need becomes like lower and lower, eventually you're going to have to stop fasting, because otherwise you are going to be going into a severe caloric deficit. Or if you are going to continue with how many calories you started with, the healthy amount that you need, you're going to start gaining weight because now your BMR is lower than when you started. So that's why fasting is not a permanent solution, but it is something that you can do. Like I said, so you can throw in the 16-8 method, you can throw in the eat-stop method. There's the other one, the 5-2 diet. So with this method, you basically consume 500 to 600 calories on 2 non-consecutive days of the week. And then for the other 5 days of the week, you just eat normally. So it's literally just like 2 days of the week. It's a very low caloric day. Not
So
back.
you have low and normal days.
Yeah, not back to back, but just
Okay.
just like if like Monday and Thursday you only eat 500 calories, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you're eating normally as you would.
That's interesting.
So those are kind of the main methods for intermittent fasting, but yeah, not a permanent solution. But for me, the reason I'm still kind of on the 1 meal a day structure was because one, it's easy. Like I don't have to, figure out what I'm going to eat for 3 meals a day. I can literally just know, all right, I have to plan for 1 meal a day. So if you are trying to meal plan and meal prep, it's really, really simple because you're planning for 1 meal a day instead of 3 meals a day. So just knowing what you're going to eat once a day as opposed to 3 times a day makes it a lot simpler. Makes it a lot cheaper. What I like to do is I like to buy only as much food as I need for like the next few days, and then when I'm basically out of food, I'm not tempted to snack on things when I'm a little bit hungry because I have no food. That's essentially how I've chosen to do that. It just eliminates craving, eliminates temptation, and it's really just something that you go, oh well, suck it up. You're not going to be eating again until the next day at a certain time, so it helps keep you on track.
The poor man's diet.
Yeah, so making sure that again you are making it so that like you with OMAD, yeah, you could have a pizza every single day, once a day, and that technically follows within the guideline of OMAD. But is a
Not
pizza
recommended, but
is a pizza going to be an efficient use of that structure? Obviously not, because it's not nutrient dense. You're not getting everything you need, and you're getting a lot of bad things out of it too. So if you are going to be fasting, any type of fasting, making sure that on the days that you are fasting, you want to be making sure that those meals are going to be good, packed with nutrition, and making sure they're going to be able to fuel you for the next time you need to eat. But
before we move on, I quickly want to ask. So when you were doing your 1 meal a day, were you so you had your 1 hour feeding window.
Mm-hmm.
Did you just have that one meal, or did you just slowly throughout that hour kind of consume your food, trying to like make the most out of it?
Yeah, no. So I cooked one big meal, all at once, ate it all at once, and that was it for the next 23 hours.
Okay, because I was thinking like if you have that 1 hour, what I would do is as much whatever my I guess my calorie limit is for that time. I would literally eat it as slow as possibly for throughout that hour to increase the digestion time. Because
Yeah.
again, if you only have that one meal, you want to like take advantage of it as much as you possibly can. Because that's all you're eating.
But
I
yeah,
mean,
like
plus your like little snacks and stuff.
eventually gets to the point, like it got to the point for me where I wasn't hungry in between like fasts. When I was fasting, I was not hungry at all. Like I sometimes I even went like more than 24 hours. Like I like if I was working late or something, I would go
Yeah.
like 26 30 hours without eating. I'd get home late, then I'd make my dinner and just kind of reset the next day. So it's something that your body does get used to, but it's not something that you should incorporate into a regular routine. It's something that you do for a certain amount of time, get the results that you need, go back on a normal diet, and then eventually, if you need to go back to fasting again, you can go back to fasting again. Um, but yeah, I did my research obviously before I just jumped into OMAD because I had heard it about OMAD on a podcast. Actually, they were just talking about how one of the crew had started doing it, and somebody had lost like 100. It was 100 pounds, 150 pounds. To be fair, though, he was like exercising and doing OMAD, and he was doing it for an entire year, and had a dramatic weight loss. So I figured I'd give it a shot. But I think
Okay.
if you are fasting, knowing that you need to, just like with all of these diets, supplement it with exercise because that's how you're going to take advantage of a lot of these gains or losses in this scenario. And making sure that you are doing it when you need to do it and not doing it all the time because these are not permanent solutions. That being said, though, there are certain diets that I'm going to move into here in a second that can be a lifestyle. A diet's not necessarily something that's a solution to a problem. A diet can be a lifestyle as well. And certain diets do kind of, you need to be in that lifestyle to even be able to adhere because a lot of them are quite tricky. So the first one I want
I
to
guess
talk
wait. I
about.
just want to quickly say, ideally, like in any situation, whatever diet that you do take up, it is a lifestyle. It ideally it's not just a temporary fix, and ideally it's something that over an extended period of time you only make the smallest adjustments to get what you want. But
Right.
yeah,
So, first one we can get into here is the Mediterranean diet. So, basically, the Mediterranean diet is a way of eating that's going to be based on the traditional cuisine of the countries bordering the Mediterranean Sea. So, like anything, I'm just
Greek.
like, yeah, like
Just had a moment there.
if you look at a map, and you look at the Mediterranean Sea, all of the in the Mediterranean. So like you've got, I think what Turkey is
Don't worry,
part of
it's
the
okay, man. I'm pulling it up.
Mediterranean,
You don't gotta say anything. Let me pull it up. We got Italy, we got Greece. Turkey, technically yes, but that's
like Malta,
kind of moving towards
Cyprus.
Middle Eastern food stuff like that. Malta. I guess the main like model is like Greek and usually Italian food is what it's mainly modeled of. Like people of like I believe Sicily is the city on the coast.
But then you've also got countries like Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Iraq. Like they're all considered Mediterranean. So like
Yeah,
I'm sure most people know what Mediterranean food is. Like there's plenty of restaurants that say, oh, certified Mediterranean food or classic Mediterranean. Like you know what Mediterranean is, but essentially the Mediterranean diet kind of follows the traditional diet of people living in these countries. So maybe not the modern diet because I'm sure the Western diet is also pretty much prevalent around the world, but the main components of the Mediterranean diet is basically going to be like lots of vegetables, lots of fruit, lots of whole grains, like we talked about, not whole wheats, but whole grains and healthy fats. There's going to be like a weekly intake of fish, poultry, beans, and eggs. Little bit of dairy products, not a whole lot, and very little red meat. Trying to shy away from red meat. Um, there's like I said when we talk about lifestyles, so like the Mediterranean diet, especially in the Mediterranean, is the whole lifestyle. Sharing meals with your family, friends, enjoying a glass of red wine, being physically active, embracing the Mediterranean, the classical Mediterranean lifestyle. So with this diet, it's more plant based than it is meat based. So like I said, the foundation is going to be vegetables, fruits, herbs, nuts, beans, whole grains, all of that stuff, and then the meals are going to be built around these plant-based foods. So with a little bit of dairy, poultry, and eggs kind of thrown in there. Same with seafood, but for the most part, they're all going to be meals that are based around the plant-based ingredients in the food. And like I said, red meat is going to be an occasional indulgence. It's not going to be something that's always present. There's going to be an inclusion of healthy fats. So healthy fats are kind of the building block of the Mediterranean diet. So they're eaten instead of less healthy fats, like we talked about, saturated and trans fats, which are going to contribute to heart disease. We don't want heart disease. We want to stay away from that. So olive oil being the primary source of fat in the Mediterranean diet. It's going to provide monounsaturated fat, which has been found to lower cholesterol and the LDL, which is considered the bad cholesterol levels. Nuts and seed also contain monounsaturated fat. Fish, very important Mediterranean diet, especially fatty fish, so mackerel, herring, sardines, tuna, salmon. Those are all going to be rich in omega-3 fatty acids, which is a type of polyunsaturated fat that may reduce inflammation in the body, as well as have a whole bunch of other things. Like a lot of people, I'm sure most people have taken fish oil at some point in their life, or just, omega-3 supplements. They're going to help decrease blood clotting, decrease risk of stroke and health failure. Omega-3s are just going to be great in general. So when we're working around the Mediterranean diet, we just want to include all of those things. So it's more of a lifestyle diet than of specific restricted saying, okay, you can't eat this, you can't eat this, you can't eat this, here's what you need to stick to. It's basically just saying, take all of these components of this lifestyle that these people have lived with and try and emulate that into a specific diet. So I think I could live with a Mediterranean diet. I think for the most part, I would enjoy all of this stuff. What about you?
Honestly, it's pretty much fairly similar to what I eat. I grew up in a Hispanic household, so the beans, legumes, all those things are fairly present. The only thing that I've actually done for myself recently is I phased out the majority of my dairy, not because I'm lactose. Well, I'm definitely not lactose to a certain extent, but it doesn't sit with me the best. And I've replaced again my those saturated trans fats with olive oil and almonds. That's what I go with for the most part. Fish is the only one that I have a hard time getting on board with. One, the amount of protein that I usually eat can be kind of hard to justify eating fish, simply because chicken is just a lot more convenient and fish is a little bit expensive. But if money was not a thing and somebody gave me the option of eating the Mediterranean diet in like its fullest extent and general aspects about the lifestyle, honestly, I wouldn't have any issue. When I eat out, pretty much what I get is Mediterranean food anyway, so it really wouldn't be too much of a change for me. It would just be the fish. That's the only thing getting on board with that.
All right. Yeah. So, just like I said in the chat here, longevity is a big factor with the Mediterranean diet. So it is a long-term thing, but it's going to be something that is eventually, I would say worth it, because it does have a lot of good health benefits. We have like lowering the risk of cardiovascular disease, can even improve sleep quality, as well as the weight loss. If you're, cutting out, it is, it's not as, yeah, there's fat in the Mediterranean diet, but it is a healthy fat diet. It's not a bad fat diet, if that makes sense.
It's also in proportion to if it's calorie balanced, also based on the lifestyle and stuff like that.
Right.
In fact, I think what the comment what meant was not that keeping the diet for a long period of time, is that like health longevity is actually
yes,
the important
like
part.
it's I don't know if it's proven, but it's claimed that. Well, I mean,
it's actually shown, like people from the Mediterranean, like they're one of, I forget what it was called. I actually had it in a class of mine. It's something zones, like different areas of the world where people in these areas, they live exceptionally longer than other periods, like some periods in Japan, Sicily, those Mediterranean countries. Those are some of the areas, which is why people like even care about the Mediterranean diet, is because they noticed, oh, these people are living so much longer, or not so much. Yeah, you could even say more fulfilling, healthier. That's what it was, blue zones. which is why they decided to study the Mediterranean diet and why it's quote unquote become a fad diet. I'm really sure if we could even call it a fad diet because it's a solid lifestyle and way to maintain overall good health when it comes to your nutrition.
Right. So moving on from the Mediterranean, we've got the ketogenic diet, which we've talked about a little bit before, otherwise known as keto. I'm sure it's another big one that some people have heard of. So basically, the keto diet is a low carb, very low carb, high fat diet that shares a lot of similarities with the Atkins diet, which we'll talk about before, and just regular low carb diets, which we've talked about. It basically involves drastically reducing your carbohydrate intake and replacing it with fat. So when you significantly reduce your carbohydrates, it limits your body's supply of glucose, so that's sugar basically, which is the main source of energy for your cells. Which is why when we talk about who shouldn't be on a low carb diet, we say to athletes, because the athletes need glucose, they need the glycogen. So obviously, if you're an athlete, stay away from keto. But for the most part, yeah, it's going to limit the body supply of glucose. So what happens then is this reduction of carbs puts your body into a metabolic state called ketosis. And when this happens, your body becomes really efficient at burning fat for energy. And then it also takes turns fat into ketones in the liver, which can supply energy for the brain. So there's multiple benefits of being in ketosis, but the main one is basically removing carbs as your primary fuel source and making your body rely on fat, and that's how you're going to lose that weight because it's going to burn that fat, use it for energy. So there's a bunch of like different types of splits for the keto diet. The standard one, though, is going to be typically 70% fat, 20% protein, and only 10% carbs. So yeah, very, very high fat, very, very low carbs, but the goal is to be in ketosis. That being said, though, you don't want to always be in ketosis because there are drawbacks as well of not having a lot of carbs, which we have talked about. But that is the primary principle of keto diet. So things that you should really be avoiding while you're on keto, anything that's high in carbs, really. So sugary foods specifically, because they are going to have that glucose. So soda, fruit juice, smoothies, anything that's sweet. You want to stay away from grains or starches. So anything that's going to be wheat-based, right, pasta, cereal, basically no grains, just as if you were gluten-free. So if you are looking for an alternative, I would say gluten-free for the most part is going to help you kind of cope with being on keto. Beans and legumes, so like peas, kidney beans, lentils, chickpeas, stuff like that. Generally want to stay away from those. Anything that's going to be low fat or diet products, so anything that says diet in front of it, so like low fat mayonnaise, salad dressings, condiments, anything like that. Any unhealthy fats you want to stay away from. So making sure that even though it is a high fat diet, you want to be primarily healthy fat. So staying away from processed vegetable oils, mayonnaise, stuff like that. Limiting your alcohol consumption a lot. Alcohol is a carbohydrate. And any like sugar-free foods as well. Stay away from those. Artificial sweeteners, stuff like that. Things that you can use. We've gone over what you can't, things that you can. So meats on the table. You're good with meat. So steak, ham, sausage, bacon, any meat. Meat is meat in this scenario. Fatty fish is going to be fantastic, like we talked about in the Mediterranean diet. And healthy fats, we want salmon, trout, tuna, mackerel. Eggs are going to be fantastic because we've got that omega-3 content as well. Butter and cream is going to be really good. If you really want to be like good with it, though, make sure you're getting grass-fed butter and heavy cream as well. Cheese, so unprocessed cheese specifically, so cheddar, goat, cream cheese, blue cheese, mozzarella, anything like that. Nuts and almonds, always going to be good for fat supply. So nuts like almonds, walnuts, flax seeds, pumpkin seeds, chia seeds, any nuts, they're going to be great. Healthy oils, so we're staying away from the processed vegetable oils, but we want to get like extra virgin olive oil, coconut oil, avocado oil, any of those like specifically fatty oils. We want to definitely want to include avocados. Avocados are kind of just like the I
It's the
guess
staple.
that's
Yeah.
the staple of a healthy fat. And I think over the years, avocado's popularity has just boomed because of this. It's almost I think avocado is considered a superfood. I would assume it would have to be with the amount of stuff that you can get out of an avocado. I would consider it a superfood. So yeah, avocados, guacamole, anything avocado based is going to be great. Low carb veggies. So you could still include vegetables because yes, there are carbohydrates in vegetables, but there are low carb veggies. So any green veggies are going to be low carb. Tomatoes, onions, peppers, they're all going to be good. Now the keto diet. Um, Again, if you're an athlete or you need that high carb diet, stay away from it. But a keto diet is going to be great for people who are overweight. Obviously, we are going to be cutting. It's going to still follow that calories in versus calories out. We are cutting a lot of the bad calories out. People who have
If you're doing it right,
diabetes,
it should though.
yeah, people who have diabetes are going to be good because with diabetes and stuff like that, like you want to follow the glycemic index and try and limit your carbohydrate intake,
Well,
which
not so much limit, just be very
be
in
aware of,
control.
yeah, in control of
Yeah.
your carbohydrate intake, which keto diet does that by default by eliminating you know 20-30% of the carbohydrates out of your normal diet anyways. And people who are looking to improve their metabolic health as well is going to be really good for those people. So yeah, it's going to be less suitable for elite athletes or anybody who's wishing to add large amounts of muscle or weight. So if you're trying to gain weight, keto's not going to be great. If you're an athlete, keto's not going to be great. But for the most part, I could live with being on a keto diet. Although, no, maybe not, because having to eliminate like grains and starches, so like it's no pasta, it's no rice, it's no bread. I don't know if I could do that.
I mean, the only way for myself, I guess, speak for myself. By default, I bodybuild, so I can't.
Hmm.
I would, I would be a pretty. I'd go from a mediocre to terrible bodybuilder.
Yeah.
Um, Even for myself, like I just function very well on carbohydrate. I don't like similar to what I said about the low carbohydrate diet. The only way to really find out is to experiment and kind of go with it. Some people like keto for them is just like a walk in the park.
Mm-hmm.
Other people like they literally look like they've been dying for for several weeks.
Yeah. So I guess moving on here to a diet that I think is really hard, is the paleo diet. So the paleo diet, which is short for Paleolithic, which is the era in which the cavemen and the early humans roamed the earth, um, basically takes a modern takes modern processed foods out of our diet and returns to the diet of a hunter gatherer from 2.5 million years ago. So to stay healthy on this diet, you need to supplement it with regular exercise. This is not something you can just do without supplementing a healthy lifestyle as well. So on this caveman diet, we can call it, what you it's more of what you can eat as opposed to what you can't eat. So the paleo diet is not proven to work. But if you want to give it a try, you need to prioritize fueling up on a lot of natural foods and a lot of natural fats. So paleo really just includes a lot of whole foods, a lot of natural foods, literally anything that our ancestors, the cavemen in this era, would have eaten. So that's going to include lean cuts of meat, so lean beef, pork, poultry, preferably grass-fed, organic, free-range selections, anything that's going to be as natural as possible. So you got game animals as well. They would have eaten that. So quail, venison, bison. If you can get hands on those, obviously those are a little bit more exotic meats. So don't be going out of your way to try and find bison. It is what it is.
This with pigeon, man, you're fine.
Yeah. Um, Eggs, but no more than 6 a week, and preferably free range. They did have eggs, but again, not a lot, and they weren't as processed. Fish, going to be great, including shellfish. You could have shellfish as well. Any fruit, so strawberries, cantaloupe, mangoes, they're all going to be good to go. You want non-starchy vegetables, so asparagus, onions, peppers, anything that's going to be a veggie but non-starchy. Nuts and seeds are fair game, as well as olive oil, flaxseed oil, and walnut oil specifically. So keep in mind that there are some versions of the keto, or not the keto, the paleo diet that are less strict than others, and do
I was about to say, I'm like, olive oil doesn't sound like
yeah.
something.
So like this is kind of like the base.
Yeah.
Like if you want to really lean into doing paleo, then yeah, those are your guidelines to restrictions. But some actually do also allow like dairy products, or legumes as well. But like we didn't discover how to milk a cow, until I guess fairly recently in our human evolution. So certainly the Paleolithic humans were not milking cows, um, that we know of, anyways. So foods you want to avoid: all dairy products for this reason. So that includes milk, cheese, yogurt, butter, all of it. It's out. Cereal grains such as wheat, rye, rice, and barley, because again, that is not something we farmed for until fairly recently in our evolution. Legumes are out. Starchy vegetables, so potatoes. Again, we didn't know that we could grow potatoes. So I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to think back to kind of like prehistoric times. There was like a certain era in which like almost like the farming era where we discovered that we could grow all this stuff. So things like potatoes, all like corn, potatoes, all these crops that we discovered. I'm trying to remember at what point, but it was a specific time in history that like
Oh, I was gonna say Industrial Revolution. That's
no,
very wrong.
definitely not. But no,
It's
there,
like it when agriculture, yeah, when it
yeah,
became a thing.
basically when we discovered agriculture, that's when we started having things like our corn, our potatoes, stuff like that, as well as like our wheat, our rice, barley, rye, all that fun stuff. So we're cutting out sweets as well. Obviously, they did not have lollipops in their caves. Artificial sweeteners are gone too. Anything that's going to be like a sugary soft drink, fruit juices are out. You can't even have juice, man. Any processed or cured meats, so that includes like bacon, deli meat, hot dogs, because we they did not have hot dogs. They had the thigh of a cow, basically. And any other highly processed foods are going to be out of the paleo diet. It's yeah, I don't know if I could really conform to paleo, to be honest, because that just seems like no fun at all. It's very
I'm not sure
basic.
why you would.
So
You know,
it follows the same thing, that kind of follows behind all of these diets is, it can increase your lifespan. It can provide all these general health benefits. Obvious. Well, I don't know if I would say like the main thing that people get out of the paleo diet is it's eating in its purest form before we evolved into all of the processed foods that we have today. It's literally the diet of the first humans, what they ate, how they lived. Now, to be fair, I mean they only lived until like 40 and then they died, but following their diet definitely can have its benefits. But yeah, I can't see myself ever going on paleo, to be honest.
I understand. I guess the rationale is, paleo, the removal of various unhealthy aspects of, processed foods.
Now,
Uh,
what
that's
paleo can actually be good for is like I know somebody who is gluten free and dairy free. Like they can't have dairy, they can't have gluten. So at that point, what can you have? So the paleo diet actually does really help.
Yeah.
Kind of when you are gluten and dairy free. Paleo is basically going to conform and fill in the gaps of what you're restricted, because you can't have dairy, you can't have grains. Well, paleo cuts both of those out. So I do know of people who have just kind of gone on the paleo diet because they are gluten and dairy restricted. So that could be a reason, at least for one reason why people would want to get into. And the exercise factor in the paleo diet was hunting and gathering all day. That's also very true. So yeah, you want to supplement this with exercise for sure. This is not something you want to just do, because just like our ancestors, the hunters and gatherers, they did not sit around at their desk all day, watching YouTube videos. They were out looking for
living the paleo lifestyle.
Yeah, they were out looking for the meat. They were out looking for the fruits and stuff. It's the hunter gatherer lifestyle. So, not saying you have to become a hunter gatherer, but understanding the certain physiological needs that comes with being on this diet, essentially.
I mean, I could say it's solid if you're a person who eats a lot of processed foods, and you're some people are all in or nothing people. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
if this is the way in which you reduce your total amount of processed foods and have a more realistically, a lot of elements are very similar to the Mediterranean diet. Just things that aren't processed, and just simply move towards a more whole foods diet. I would just say you could probably just take it not a step further, but just manipulate it where you see fit, and just stick to the non-processed to a certain extent. If convenience allows.
All right. So next diet we've got here that we briefly brought up was the Atkins diet. So the Atkins diet, created by Dr. Robert Atkins in 1972, is a low-carb diet, and it's usually recommended for weight loss. And the main reason why, like we talked about before, low-carb diets are so effective for weight loss is that reduction in carbs and increased protein intake are going to lead to a reduced appetite, making you eat fewer calories without having to think about it. So the Atkins diet is split into 4 different phases. So phase 1 being what's called the induction phase. So on Atkins, basically you're getting under 20 grams of carbs per day for 2 weeks. So under 20 grams of carb for 2 weeks. You're eating high fat, high protein with low carb vegetables like leafy greens. This is what's going to kickstart the weight loss process. Moving into phase 2, we have balancing. So slowly you're going to add in more nuts, more low-carb vegetables, and small amounts of fruit back into your diet, which takes us to phase 3, which is fine-tuning. So when you're very close to your weight goal, you're going to add more carbs to your diet until your weight loss rate slows down. And then phase 4, we have maintenance. So here you can eat as many healthy carbs as your body can tolerate without regaining weight. That's basically the main process of the Atkins diet, and it's only during the 2-week induction phase that you need to minimize your intake of carb sources. So after induction's over, you can slowly add back those healthier carbs, like higher carbs vegetables, fruits, berries, potatoes, legumes, as well as healthier grains like oats and rice. So however, your chances are that you need to stay moderately low carb for life, even if you reach your weight loss goals. So if you start eating the same old foods again in the same amounts as before, you're going to regain the weight, obviously. And this is going to be true of any weight loss diet. But I'm not entirely sure of the efficacy of the Atkins diet. I haven't read too many studies done on it, but it just seems like a modified version of the low carb diet, essentially.
From what I understand, he was, because he released 2 versions. There was one in 1972, and then he released an updated version. And he was, again, rode on this wave, on the belief that I guess all this kind of unfounded research was coming out with, saying that reduced saturated fat and reduced fat in general is linked to better cardiovascular health. And then kind of hopped on to the reduced saturated fat is also linked with obesity, which was never really concluded 100%, or still is kind of disproven, or is kind of up in the air.
Right.
So that's, I guess, he was the formalized guy who kind of pioneered this low carbohydrate I guess movement, right, in like the 70s, and I think the second one he came out was in 1984, which is what was his updated version.
Right. So those are the kind of main lifestyle change diets that are kind of out there. There's obviously a whole bunch more, but those are the main ones. Like, again, also like we talked about at the beginning, like veganism, vegetarianism, all of those, which are more, depending on why you're on those diets. Some do it for the moral reason. Some do it just because they don't like meat. Some do it for the health benefits, but just to quickly touch on those diets, I would say if you are considering going vegetarian or going vegan, making sure you are supplementing the nutrients that you need, that you are missing out on, like that iron from the red meat, calcium as well, protein. You can get actually a lot of plant protein. So as long as you're doing it smart, you should be fine. So do your research if you are planning on going vegan, going vegetarian, and understanding what alternatives you have when getting your macronutrients specifically. But moving on here so those are like the main ones that you can do by yourself. But as you all know, there are certain programs that are, I guess, monetized, created by companies, and then sold to hundreds of thousands of people around the world. The main one that I would like to talk about right now is Weight Watchers. And I'm sure everyone's heard of Weight Watchers. Weight Watchers is huge. It's one of the most popular weight loss programs in the world. And basically how Weight Watchers works is it uses a point system to assign values to foods based on their nutritional value. So when you start the program, you're given a set amount of daily points. It's going to be based on your body and goals, but basically what this means is that no foods are technically off limits in Weight Watchers, but you still need to stay below your daily set point of points. So, for example, healthier foods are going to be lower in points than unhealthier foods. So if we take like a 230 calorie glazed donut, that's going to be worth 10 points, whereas 230 calories of yogurt topped with like blueberries, granola, whatever, is going to be only worth 2 points. So essentially, if you are, and I'll talk about why this system has issues, because you're probably thinking, okay, well then, why don't, if I'm trying to stay under, let's say 50 points per day, then
hold on, I pulled it up here. It says typically members are assigned 30 points per day.
30 points a day. So like that's like that's 3 of these glazed donuts in theory, and that's your entire points for the day. Obviously, yeah, you're at your limit of points, but you can see why eating 3 glazed donuts per day to reach 30 points a day is an issue. But I guess, well, I'll talk about the pros and cons, but basically to describe Weight Watchers, like you're a member, you have access to a whole bunch of like support from like Weight Watchers coaches, as well as like diet resources as well. So the pros to Weight Watchers, because there are pros, there's no bad science or like magic cures involved in Weight Watchers, which I think is a good thing. It's just purely, well, they have their system, which is flawed, but the science behind it does make sense, and there's no like magic pill that they'll just give you and say, here's a weight loss pill. So that's good. It should work if you follow it. The social aspect of it, I think, can really help to stay on track, because Weight Watchers works as like a community with a support system in place to encourage and guide members. So maybe not now because of COVID, but like there are Weight Watchers like meetings that people would go to, and like they would all talk to each other. So it is a very social, very communal way, which I think can be really good, because a lot of people, just like fitness as well, need kind of a support structure around them, and like-minded individuals as well, where you can kind of share your goals, share your improvements that you made, and get support. So I think that's really great that Weight Watchers does that. And another good thing is the program focuses on flexibility rather than restrictions. So it focuses on healthy things that you can eat rather than unhealthy things that you need to cut out. So it does teach healthy eating skills like portion control. So I would say those are all the pros of Weight Watchers. Now, we talk about the cons. The program is not run by medical professionals, but more just like coaches. I'm not entirely sure the qualification of these coaches, but what we do know is that they are not dietitians, they are not nutritionists like we talked before. So it actually might be more beneficial to just use that money that you'd use for Weight Watchers and go and consult an actual dietitian or a nutritionist. They might be a lot better to, when it comes to guiding you and helping you, even just like your doctor as well, because they have a little bit more of a stake in helping you, and also for your motivation as well. It's a lot easier to ghost your Weight Watchers coach than it is to ghost your doctor.
Yeah.
So I would say that's definitely a con. But yeah, when we talk about money, it can actually be pretty costly, depending on what your options are, and how long you intend to be on the program, and kind of what you choose. Like I think like you can get like one-on-one coaching for a certain price. You can have access to a whole bunch of different resources for a certain price. So there's obviously the monetization aspect, which I mean, sure, they are, you know, a company, they need to make money. I understand that. But again, it's just kind of balancing your budget and understanding if that money is worth it. And even like Weight Watchers is actually one of the more cheaper weight loss programs that exist out there. Like there are big ones, like I think like Curves. If you've heard of Curves, I saw a comparison. Like if you were to get like the total package from Weight Watchers, it'd be like $1,600 a year, whereas like the Curves total package is like $8,000 a year.
I know there's another one. What's it called Noom. That's one that I've
Yeah,
seen.
I've seen that before too. So just understanding like balancing the funds, is it even worth the money, or could I put the money towards something else? So another problem that people might have with Weight Watchers is the point system. So it can be tedious for some people, just like counting calories and counting macros. It's time consuming and it's not for everyone. Some people just they hate counting their calories, they hate counting their macros. It's not for them because it can be a bit of a task sometimes. So if you're not into that, and I could see why Weight Watchers might not be a good choice for you. Another con we have here is I feel there's too much freedom in the diet. Now, what this means, like, I think freedom can be a downfall for some people. You know, I myself, you know, would probably gravitate towards a more restrictive diet program than saying, hey, you can eat whatever you want just as long as you're within your certain amount of points. Because what this can lead to, and what I've heard stories of, is people will use all of their daily points on less nutritious foods, which is going to lead to unhealthy habits. Like some members, having said that, what they'll do is they'll save up their points to binge unhealthy foods later, which obviously, yeah, they're not over their daily limit, but that's not exactly a healthy dieting strategy, and it's a really bad habit to get into.
I mean, I guess that leads into another issue, is just being, if your whole system is just based on not education, then, I mean, we also have to remember Weight Watchers and all these companies, they are companies, so it obviously is very beneficial for them if people never really become independent and move away from their product. If they're always dependent on using their ranking system and never really providing information about why it is what they do, they're never going to leave. Which, I mean, that sounds like a good business strategy, but business and health obviously aren't always compatible.
Right. So, like, Weight Watchers is not the only multi-million-dollar weight loss program out there, but I would say it's certainly one of the better ones. But if you are planning on going to one of these companies, it's really important to research and weigh the benefits to cost ratio when it comes to any of these programs. And as a general rule, like I said at the beginning, stay away from any program that tries to like sell you their own products. I'm trying to remember if Weight Watchers used to do this. They used it might be Weight Watchers, it might be somebody else, but they used to like sell you like Weight Watchers like branded foods, where it would even have like the amount of points that like the meal would come on, and they would just like sell that to their members. Which actually I think in this context is
that I can remember
fine. But again, it's kind of teetering on that gray area. But when I talk about staying away from companies that try to sell you their own products, I'm talking about like pseudoscience products or like fat burning pills, stuff like that. And anything that seems too good to be true or seems like a magic solution, you want to stay away from that. Which is going to bring us into our next review here, which is going to be weight loss products. There's only a few that I kind of want to talk about, but they are going to be really important. So what I've noticed a lot, so I think just like I talked about on the last episode, I've been, now that we are on TikTok and I'm posting like posts and highlights and stuff on TikTok, I've noticed like there's a whole side of TikTok, and this is not just on TikTok, any social media, basically multi-level marketing, essentially, not necessarily, but like it is either MLM or like influencers trying to sell you on a product that obviously they've been endorsed to sell you. And a lot of times it is these magic weight loss cures, magic weight loss products that I'm seeing, and I'm seeing a lot of people buying into them as well. And the important thing to note when it comes to these products is the products do what the products are supposed to do. What the issue here is that the products are being sold in a way that basically they're how can I say this? They're not entirely truthful how they're selling it. It's like, yeah, this product does burn fat, but if you take it and solely take this and spend, $130 on these pills I'm trying to send you, with the under the guise of if you take these pills you will lose weight, that's not entirely truthful, because yes, it burns fat in a certain degree, but it's not going to burn fat in the way that people are thinking it's going to burn fat. But they're being pretty manipulative in how they sell these supplements, and kind of like manipulate how specifically these things work. And there's a lot of like it's one of those gray areas where like they're not lying, but they'll leave out significant information that will influence how a person decides to go and buy these, if it's going to work for them. So
I think the biggest thing that it's that the effect that they're claiming, or the importance that their product has, is pretty much disproportionate to what it's actually going to do.
right. So
That's pretty much it.
when it comes to like fat burning supplements, which is the biggest one I see, it's commonly misconstrued that these types of supplements are going to work on their own. If that were the case, then obesity would be solved. There'd be no more obesity if somebody could just pop a pill and no longer be fat. So in order to really benefit from these supplements, you need to already be on a calorie restricted diet, like we've talked about, as well as engaging in routine exercise. So working out and already being on a healthy diet and then taking these supplements is going to be the most beneficial way of doing it. So limiting your caloric intake is going to help drastically improve the results you see from these fat burners. So basically what fat burners do is they help curb your appetite, they're going to boost your energy, and they're going to help fat be used as energy while increasing your metabolism. But if you think all of these things are going to happen while you scarf down a pizza, scarf down burgers daily, you're going to be pretty frustrated with your results. Like, they need to work in tandem with each other. You can't just take a pill and all of your worries are gone. Now, the thing with these is, though, that they can also be dangerous. So the issue with fat burners and like their safety is fat burner supplements do not need to be approved or regulated by the FDA. So that's the drug, Food and Drug Administration. And they basically just say, like, what can be safe to ingest and what's not safe to ingest. So fat burner supplements are not regulated by the FDA. Instead, they are under the responsibility of the manufacturer, which is kind of risky, because obviously the manufacturer is trying to sell their product. They're not going to say, hey, you probably shouldn't ingest this, it's going to be bad for you. But there have been many instances of products being removed from shelves due to harmful ingredients, which have sometimes fatal side effects. Usually, obviously, you're not going to die, but there are adverse side effects from a lot of these.
In some cases, like, you can, depending on what ingredient is in there, you can overdose to a certain extent.
And
it's overdosed on fat burners recently.
Yeah. It is up to the manufacturer to say, hey, these are the risks involved. Whereas for like any other supplement, it's you put it out and then it goes to the FDA, and the FDA assesses, okay, well, these are the risks involved and this is safe to sell or this isn't safe to sell. But like the main one that is kind of sold that you'll kind of hear floating around is going to be thermogenic supplements. So basically, thermogenics, to put it as simply as I can, is basically just like thermodynamics and like how our body like burns calories. Basically what thermogenic supplements are going to do, they're going to boost your metabolism, they're going to increase your fat burning and reduce your appetite, like I said before. So some natural thermogenic substances are going to include caffeine to start with. So what caffeine does is it increases your adrenaline, which stimulates your fat cells to release fatty acids into your bloodstream, where they can then be used as energy. So caffeine's effect on the metabolism are relatively small, so honestly, supplementing with caffeine is not going to make a huge impact, but it might help when you are combining it with exercise and dieting, but don't rely on caffeine as a primary source of weight loss. Another one I see a lot is green tea. So, green tea contains two compounds that have a thermogenic effect. The first is caffeine, which is going to have obviously all the benefits that I literally just talked about. The second one, let's see if I can pronounce this word, is going to be called epigallocattation gallate, or EGCG for short. I'm just going to say that because that word is far too long. Yeah, like I said before, caffeine is going to stimulate that adrenaline. It's going to put the fatty acids into your bloodstream, use fat as energy. What EGCG? Oh my god, this is ridiculous. What
That one.
the secondary component of green tea basically enhances these effects by slowing down the breakdown of adrenaline, so its impact is amplified essentially. So its effects are still kind of minor, but a little bit more research needs to be done to kind of understand how green tea affects metabolism and body composition. Um, Next one here we have is capsaicin, which, if you've heard of capsaicin, uh, yeah, capsaicin, it's the molecule that makes chili peppers spicy. So the spicier the pepper, the more capsaicin it contains. So, like caffeine, capsaicin stimulates adrenaline, which speeds up metabolism. It also reduces your appetite, meaning you eat fewer calories, and together, these effects can make capsaicin a powerful thermogenic substance. But studies have shown that it does have the potential to lead to significant weight loss over time, but there's evidence that also suggests that your body can adapt to capsaicin, which is going to reduce those effects over time. So just like we talked about diminishing returns, your body's eventually going to adapt to it, and it's not going to be as powerful as it once was. I would say like those are the main three thermogenic substances. There are like a whole bunch of other ones, and you'll see like when people are trying to sell you these fat burner pills, it'll have like it's like yahambi or something from like the bark from the yahambi tree in Africa. And it's got like this substance in it, and like it's just going to be pills that include all of that in it. But like I said, all of these substances, they do what they're supposed to do, but they don't necessarily work as they're marketed to work. So they're basically marketed as a quick and easy way to burn fat. And while there is evidence that they can reduce appetite, increase metabolism, the effects are still going to be relatively small, but they might be more effective if you pair it with exercise and proper dieting strategies. But they're not magic pills, and that's the thing to take away from these, is they are not the end all and be all of the weight loss solution. Like, you can't just take them and lose the weight. Always do your research when you're considering any of these substances, making sure you actually understand what they are and what they do, and then using your own judgment to figure out if this is good for you. Like, I think for all of these products that these people try and sell you, they all have a use. It's not like they're going to sell you placebo pills. Like, they do a function, but it's how they're marketed, right? And you just need to be able to kind of see through the veil that they're kind of coating over this whole thing. And just being smart about it, doing your own research, doing your own kind of, just research in general. And yeah, don't be like, if you see like a big word like, what did I see before, the
ECGC or whatever it was.
EGCG. That's such a bad acronym. It does not flow. It does not flow. But EGCG, and you see that huge thing and you go, oh, well, that seems like a big compound, or that looks like a complicated chemical structure. That must do something. Well, I mean, it does, but like not really. So
Yeah.
just understand. Do not be intimidated by a lot of the wording. Don't be intimidated by the marking, and really be able to just see through their bullshit essentially.
Yeah. I mean, what you said earlier, it's like they do have a purpose, and based on current research, if you're pretty astute with your money, the purpose is to make sure your garbage can doesn't fall over because it's empty.
Essentially.
Pretty much. I guess like the last little thing to say on fat burners is, realistically, any fat burner that actually has a significant amount of effect is going to be present in like anabolic steroids and other compounds of the sort that are illegal. And that's not even like a important factor. Is just that's, if you decide to go down that route, that's pretty much your own risk.
Right.
Like if you want a magic pill, some are out there. They come in the form of injectables or oral steroids, but there's obviously a price to pay if that's the route you want to go down, which for the most part isn't worth, skipping out on just structured dieting and exercise.
Pretty much.
Pretty
All right, so I think that's a pretty good place to end it here. There's like a few other products, like things like laxatives. Like, don't take laxatives for weight loss. Like,
yeah.
That's I feel like I don't need to explain why that doesn't make any sense. But for, I guess, people who are wondering why should I take laxatives? Well, I mean, laxatives are you're losing weight temporarily, if you know what I mean. And it's water loss. It's not fat loss. So that weight's gonna come back. So laxatives are not effective at all, even though they might be marketed as a weight loss strategy.
In fact, they're one of the most common ones, like Fiets, okay, there's a different one. There's like appetite suppressing lollipops and stuff like that. In fact, like the most common like influencer supplements of people who probably don't necessarily work out a lot, they're usually laxatives for the most part. So don't fall for it. It's a whole lot of nonsense, and honestly, you'll probably harm your digestive system for an extended period of time if you do consume them.
Pretty much. And then like there's things like waist trainers and stuff. As a general rule, if it has "as seen on TV" on the box, stay away from it. Chances are it's probably garbage.
Yeah,
at that point, you're just creating landfill waste. Don't save the environment. Don't buy into some of this stuff. But I think that's a good place to end up on that. So yeah. Closing.
That was a pretty comprehensive list of all these diet fads and stuff like that. Yeah. I guess to end off to say is most of what we talked about was in relation to weight loss and stuff like that. Obviously, there's a host of other diets out there that are more in relation to health. So as per usual, we are not experts. Take everything with a grain of salt. If you actually want to proceed, with a structured diet plan, probably go consult your doctor, dietitian, or I still forget the last
nutritionist.
Because anybody can be a nutritionist, or I guess who you trust to give you nutrition advice.
Yeah, like I would still say, like if I had to choose between Weight Watchers and a nutritionist, I would still choose a nutritionist.
Yeah.
And honestly, it might be possible that a lot of Weight Watchers coaches are nutritionists. Like, it's not a requirement, but it's just most of them are. Like people don't go into that kind of profession without having at least some kind of experience or knowledge.
Yeah.
But yeah. Apart from that, that's going to conclude today's episode. If you have any further questions, feel free to drop them. Again, this is going to be on the Fitness Decoded YouTube channel a few hours from now. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them there or hit us up on our individual socials. But that's going to conclude it for the day. But as always, feel free to subscribe to us on YouTube. We're going to be obviously posting the podcast stuff, but also doing a little bit more fitness related stuff. We've got like fitness vlog stuff, kind of like recaps of these episodes that we're doing, like follow-up episodes essentially. What else we got going on in that channel?
We talked about this before. Again, follow-up episodes where I guess we kind of condense what we said in a lot of our older episodes. We're actually going to be revisiting those and actually putting them into maybe more condensed videos that people can follow along. We're not exactly sure on the format, but it's going to be pretty much just shorter, more condensed clips of what we talk about in a way where anybody can kind of take the information and actually make it applicable. Our first episode was sleep and a lot of stuff to do with nutrition, so that's probably what we're going to start with. We're thinking of doing maybe some training vlog stuff whenever the time allows. But yeah, most of I think our extra content is going to be coming on the YouTube channel. Oh, our new schedule. Do you want to go over that?
Yeah, it's basically like weekly. So every other week is gonna be like a different format. So like next week is probably gonna be more of a just a conversation about topics we're interested in specifically, personally, and just kind of going back and forth on that. Whereas it's not going to be as structured and in depth and researched as an episode like today's. So that's kind of the how we're going to do it. So every other week's going to be an episode like this, and then on the off weeks it's going to be more of just a conversation piece, just to kind of come hang out, bring whatever topics we're interested in that week, and just talk about it basically.
Yep.
And yeah, sporadically I'll be throwing up highlights from probably just these types, because honestly I can't really pick out any highlights from the conversation ones, but if something's good I'll throw it in there. But yeah, so I have a lot of time on my hands now, so expect more content and better quality content as I kind of learn how to use the tools at my disposal. I'm learning video editing, so hopefully we're gonna get at that. I think I've pretty much knocked down the whole live show format we have going on here. I think this is fine for now, but I actually even want to go further in depth in that and actually make it even better. So stay tuned for that. We've got a lot of things in the pipeline that we're working on now, but hopefully you'll see some of those a little bit close in the future. So
that's pretty much this episode, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
yeah, we will see you all in the